Hey everyone, Brendan here. I have to update, well I don't have to, but I'm going to update Clippit, the Warlock patron for you all. So this is a free product. You can go ahead and grab the download link in the description. It's essentially taking that helpful Microsoft assistant from the past, reimagining them as a Warlock patron. This was thrown out as an idea by Serb in Discord. I thought it was hilarious, so I went ahead and built it. When there was some actual great feedback about the product, I decided we should go all out. Let's get some custom artwork done. So this was some original stuff I had put together from some free art assets available. And I tapped to Noman here to build out like the full one. And I figured I might as well show you how I actually put the art assets into the document at the same time as long as we're at it. So I don't know if you can see it here. Let's zoom in. There's some guidelines that are these red lines here. These are bleeds. What that means is if you were to print this, you want it to extend out because you're actually going to cut the edges of the paper to make sure it's exactly where you want it. And in this case, we can see the fingers actually sticking out a little bit past this. So if we were to change this W as the shortcut, it'll change your InDesign document to show like this is what it's actually going to look like. And obviously like looks cool, but we don't want to chop the finger off when we've got a bunch of stuff over here we're not actually using. So I'm going to shift this all this way, just a smidge. That's pretty good. So we've got this. The hand I think is actually looking okay. We could make this a little bigger. We're obviously losing some of this off to the side by scaling up. I don't want his hood to be off the top of the page, but I think that'll give us a little more space between the text and the hand. Not to mention, it'll make everything a little bit bigger. This is a little bit of a shadow, and we're gonna want this behind and center. I'm using Shift and the arrow keys to kind of get things into position because this one's a little bit harder to see. And we want this behind the text. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna send this to the back, and then I'm gonna send the image to the back. There we go. And now we've got this behind the text, but in front of the image. That way we can have a little bit more contrast for that lettering. That looks pretty good. So we've got that highlighted there. All right, I think the cover is done. So updated that. We've got everything with the bleeds in there. Yeah, all right, sweet. On to the next one. Okay, so we originally had that placeholder artwork down here, and now we have our new Archon, which we have to figure out how much of this we want and where we want it. So right now it looks cool. We've got this much space to work with, but I also want to add a sidebar in here. I had a couple questions come up about like, this isn't a really good fit for my game, like it has the wrong flavor, which is a little bit of a crazy concept to me because you should be able to flavor something however you want. So I decided I would add a sidebar in here to give you some ideas. We have two versions of the familiar. We've got the basic paperclip familiar, challenge rating 0 CR. It has a bonus action, which is fun. And then we have like the Archon version, which Clippit turns into a CR6, which is hilarious to me. So one thing to keep in mind is I really don't like the hard edges unless it is at the edge. So meaning if this is at like the natural fold in the center of the paper, something like this, then that makes sense to have that hard edge to me rather than bleeding over. But if it extends like this, then I'd want like this side to transition into the paper. And so there's a few ways to do that. We need to fit this block somewhere, and we had some text behind here. I want this to not actually block any text so I can see what I'm working with. Okay, now you can see that I've got these two paragraphs here that need to fit in there still. So this part becomes a little bit more like Tetris, where you're trying to figure out, all right, where do I want to stick everything so we can see all the stuff that I want to see. I think we can probably actually have this sitting over the image, kind of like I've got it. At present, we have this scaling up behind the stat block, which I think can be kind of cool. Boom, content written. Okay, so now I can see the size of what we're working with here. So what I'm doing now is I'm looking at this illustration, trying to figure out which parts of it are the most important that I want the user to be able to see. So let's shift this down. I think I want this to just sit right at the bottom here. This is the bottom of the safe place for text. So if I was to print this, I don't want any text below that. If it's a PDF, it doesn't really matter. It's not gonna get lost in translation here. But if it's not, then I wanna make sure that that isn't sitting below that line. And since I design all my stuff with the concept that I may at some point print this, then I wanna make sure that that's still there. Same thing for like important illustrations. Anything that gets into this fold here, you can imagine a book, like the very center of that, when you open the page, like you're not gonna be able to see what's on the edges because it's got that sharp kind of canyon it's disappearing into. What I'm talking about is that center right there. So her axe is disappearing into that. So I need to plan on not being able to see whatever's on the other side of that. There we go, yeah, you can see the tail. It's gonna disappear into that, so you'll see some of it, but not all of it. And then depending on your printer, they may actually print some of one side of your page on the other page to get rid of that as much as possible. So when it folds together, it's nice and neat. So this one has kind of already been put together. So if you're coming close, you can see there at the top, it's got the color stamps they're doing to make sure that everything lines up. And then you can see like the manual fold that was done here and how it's gonna fit. Now, if you imagine that in the spine, then that's how it'll kind of disappear there. Back to our document here. So if we zoom back out, I think this is okay. I can see all of the paperclip. It is within the bounds here. So some of this magical effect will disappear, as will some of these books. So let's just undo those moves so we can just keep where we had it. Now for this image, in order to get this to fit in here, I have a link to the PSD, meaning the Photoshop file. And so this is just linked to that master. So any changes I make there will be seen here. So we're gonna go ahead and just open that. So I hit that edit button and that pulls up Photoshop. Here we go. And so now we can see Noman is awesome and has left everything as all of these individual layers, which makes it easy to turn things on and off. All layers to be inside a folder. And then on that folder, I'm gonna apply a mask. And then for that mask, all I'm gonna do then is kind of feather the image. So we need that top piece where at present, all along this line up here, and then everything to the left of that stuff needs to all either be gone or be fading out. To get rid of those hard lines, I like to use a soft brush here. This just means that the end kind of just fades out, and then we're gonna erase the top. So I don't want this to be a straight line across because otherwise you'll again see that straight line. I think that detracts from like the polish of these things. I don't wanna make this too big to make that edge here, but let's erase it right here approximately. So we'll get rid of everything on this side. If you use the bracket button key, you can increase that so it's bigger. And then I'm just gonna go ahead and delete all this stuff. Actually, let's go ahead and change this to hard so I don't move that filter there that I want. Okay, and again, we can always bring some of this back if we want it. Okay, and we'll take a look at what this looks like in our document. So if we come back over here, it did update automatically, but if it didn't, if you go back to that image, it'll have like a little icon next to it that's meaning it's not updated, and then you just hit this refresh button. So you can see this is better. We can read the text, but we want this to fade in still. And then same thing, it's still sharp here. I want to get that as minimal as I can though, because I don't want to lose too much. We jump back over here to our mask. An awesome resource for doing brushes and editing is Brush Easy. So in here you can look for texture. I think that's the best way to describe it. And so I can see that right here, this watercolor splash has kind of an interesting mechanic that if you had dropped that onto an image, you could effectively do the inverse here, where instead of like painting this, you're kind of subtracting from the image in this sort of fashion. So some of it will be complete subtraction, some of it will be a little bit of subtraction, some will be almost no subtraction, and that gives you an interesting sort of texture on how this fades into the book. Ones that I find to be pretty good is a powder. This gives you a nice texture, especially if you have like some sort of content like desert, something like that. It gives you that sort of sand, gritty feel where something is kind of fading into the times of sand. You can download these. So if you want to get your brushes from there, it's easy, free resource, just requires you to attribute to that. I'm gonna go ahead and I am going to grab, I think powder actually is a good option here. So I'm gonna grab one of my powder brushes. This thing is probably huge, so I'm gonna use the left bracket to decrease that size until I can see it. And based on how the pattern shows up in that texture, I'm gonna start going ahead and subtracting off some of these pieces. And now it's gonna do a lot less than you actually think it's going to do. So if we zoom in here, you can still see some of this line up here, so I wanna get rid of that. So let's zoom back out again. And some of this is behind that stat block, so that will make it a little easier. Just grab one of these, shrink it down so that it fits. Ooh, this has some interesting texture. So let's see how that's gonna look. That actually looks pretty good. I might rotate this a little bit, so that's shift and arrow key to kind of shift that around. I want this to be a pretty flat texture on this side specifically for this light because I'm trying to keep as much of that as possible, but I also need to get rid of that extra area at the top. Something like this should work. And then let's go do the left side over here. Grab some of this wildness here and we can just plop that right in. If I go back and I open that manuscript here, we can see I'm gonna need to refresh this. It's got the little icon there warning me that something's been changed. So if I refresh, I can now see, oh, I gotta go turn the green off, refresh. So we're starting to see this come along. This is starting to look pretty good. We can see this kind of fading into the page. We definitely need, like, you can clearly see that line there. We need way more there. We need to blend this a little further. Let's pull our file back up here. So I think, and we need to get this one to blend in a little bit as well, right over this candlestick here. So let's decrease the size of this. So I'm gonna go down pretty close to the candle. And then I'm gonna go up just a little bit from that, up just a little bit from that, And then I keep rotating this because otherwise you'll have like that same pattern showing up. Save that, jump back over to document, refresh, see the icon again, refresh there. Okay, so I think it's pretty good here. I don't see, to me this looks much more like it's got that line kind of fading in. It doesn't have a hard stop there. It's hard to tell where this image actually ends. You can see it actually ends up here. I wouldn't be able to tell that. But if there's anywhere else we can see that, then that is not ideal. So here to me, this still looks like it's a little too bit of a hard edge right along here. I'm talking about right here, coming down. That I want to have cleaned up. So I need to break that up a little further. Big chunk here, like something like that. Okay, so that is too much. Now if I reverse that coloring, and instead of painting it with black, I will paint it with white. So here we can see if I'm gonna click here, it's gonna actually add material back. So refresh, good old refresh. It's a little too much, so that's pretty good, look at that. So you can see like that much more natural looking blend in with the page there. And that was because I deleted off more than I wanted intentionally to then add a little bit back, and that really dials that in. Here. I think that's okay then. Let's save that. Yeah, so we pulled it right off there. Maybe there's a little teeny bit here on any, but if it's not obstructing that contrast, so you should be able to read this just fine. Paperclip familiar, retain any, like no issues with that. All right, so I think we have taken our images and blended them into the page. So we've got our cover here, and then we've got our actual text. You can see our Archon Clippy sort of taking form here. If we wanted to, we could try to have like more of him on the page here and like really dial that in, but I think we're losing a lot of the character of the illustration itself, and he's just part of it, so I want to keep some of that in here. And I'm thinking this sort of gives that vibe I'm looking for. We've got that sidebar for the flavor pieces that we added and blended that in. We moved the review piece over. So at this point, I need to go through and I need to balance some of these pieces, and I may end up tweaking some of this stuff again a little further, but I hope you found this useful. And if you have any questions, feel free to hit me up. But this is a overview of how to get your artwork onto the page and blend it in. And if you have any questions on how I do it, feel free to ask me. All right, take care, everyone. I'll put a layer behind here, just temporary for, oh, face in the way. Oh my goodness, why don't you let me select? There we go. All right, victory.